Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Friday. My name is Danielle Horace, and I am really excited to welcome you all back to More Than School Fireside Chats powered by Rise. So we call this series More Than School because all of us believe a public education in Idaho is so much more. It's more than classrooms, more than curriculum, more than standardized tests. Our public schools prepare students to succeed far beyond the classroom. So just for fun today, I Googled, why do public schools matter? Just wanted to see what comes up. And the very first one that popped up for me was, public schools help all children fulfill their diverse potentials. Now, how simple, true, and beautiful is that? I couldn't agree more with the sentiment and the hope it provides us as we endure yet another tough season for public education in Idaho and really in our country. So before I pass the microphone, I want to encourage you all to check out our past fireside chats. We have sessions with superintendents from all over the state, and their insights really are very valuable and insightful. So you can check out our last sessions by going into our Facebook on the video section, or you can go into YouTube and look for Rise Treasure Valley Education Partnership. So it's my privilege and honor now to introduce you to my colleague, Dr. Don Coberly. Dr. Coberly is the retired superintendent of Boise Public Schools after serving 38 years as a public school educator. He's now the current co-CEO of Rise, Treasure Valley's education partnership. Don, welcome and thanks for joining.
Danielle, you said 38 years like it was a grind.
I know, it's so long.
Yeah, well, Will and I both have been in the profession for quite some time. Thank you so much, Danielle, for that introduction. And so I've known Wil Overgaard for a long, long time. We competed in sports all the way back to high school, then played together. Both went into education, both went to the University of Idaho, and both actually, I believe, Will, we both started our career in Boise, and then you moved over to Weiser. Can you give us a little bit more about your background? Why'd you get into education, and what was the allure of going to Weiser? Those kinds of things.
Sure. Thanks, Don. You know, I was a military brat, so to speak. I think you were too.
Yeah, I was.
So I moved to Boise in 1969 when my dad retired from the Marine Corps. He was a Boise native, and he wanted to come back after his 20 years of service and bring his family back to Idaho. So I graduated from Capital High School in 1973, and like you, we both enrolled and attended University of Idaho. And I did my student teaching in the spring of 78 at Bora. And it just so happened that they had an opening that fall. And I was hired to teach social studies there. And I was a young, impressionable, inexperienced teacher and coach. I was very sports minded, and I coached 3 sports for quite a few years. But I also really enjoyed my subject area, and I tried to give my students experiences and opportunities outside the classroom to learn about social studies. So, for example, I took kids to the Capitol to watch the legislature in action. We went and watched the Supreme Court in action. I coached a mock trial team and took one team from Bora to the national competition after we won the state competition.
Wow.
I took several groups of kids back to DC to participate in a week-long study tour of the nation's capital. So I really enjoyed the classroom as well as my interest in sports. I spent a total of 16 years in the classroom before transitioning to school administration, which I did in the fall of 1994 when I moved to Weiser, and I've spent the last 25 years in Weiser. First as an assistant principal at the high school, then as principal, then as a federal program director for the district, and finally as superintendent. And I really feel blessed to have had the varied and rich experiences I've had in education. So I taught in both private and public school settings. I spent 3 years at Bishop Kelly in the mid-'80s. And I've been in urban areas. I've been in rural areas. I've been a teacher. I've been a coach, been a building administrator, been a district level administrator. And I just really value the experiences that I had over my, 42 years. I did 41, and then I got called back into service last year to help out in Buhl. They needed a 1-year interim part-time superintendent to get them through the school year. But, when I first moved to Weiser, I thought, we'll do this for a couple of years, and maybe I'll get a chance to come back to the Boise area where my family, my wife's family was from. But we ended up staying and raising our family here, and found it to be a real welcoming and a great place to raise a family.
Yeah. So for our viewers and those who might view it after this live version, talk a little bit about the key differences. I mean, if you're an administrator in Boise, for example, it's a lot different than being an administrator in like a Weiser or in Buhl. Can you talk a little bit about the urban rural kind of differences that you've seen?
Well, from an administrative standpoint, whether it didn't matter what role I had at the district level, if I was the federal program director or the superintendent, I mean, it was you walk in the front door and you greet the clerk, and I'm the very next door, and my door is always open. So accessibility, I think, to the public. We're in the heart of town, and people oftentimes would call me first with an issue that they experienced with their child in a school or in a classroom. And oftentimes I had to say, the best way to solve your problem is to start first by having you talk to the teacher and then the building administrator. And if you don't, achieve any satisfaction or a resolution to your issue, then you can come back and see me. But that sort of accessibility, I think, is one of the things I found to be a little different. The other was just in terms of managing a district. I had everything from food service to transportation to recruitment to you name it, managing the plant and facilities. So I didn't have a lot of deputies in charge of different aspects of the school system. So that was a difference. The recruiting and retaining of teachers, I think, in a rural districts, I don't know if Boise or West Ada or Coeur d'Alene or Twin or some of the larger districts have run into the same issues that we have, but we found it increasingly difficult to recruit and retain teachers in our community, whether it's due to pay or you get a young teacher, lifestyle. There's not, may not be a lot of opportunities for social or nightlife kinds of things out in the rural areas. And where we used to see 8 or 10 applications for an opening, if we get 2 or 3, that's a huge change. So the pool of candidates isn't great. Yeah. We've had to, on occasion, hire teachers that will only commit for a couple of years because they're involved in a program like Teach for America.
Right. Yeah.
We've had to do that. We'd love to grow our own. We'd love to find members in the community that have a college degree that we could recruit and train, and because they're vested in the community, they're living in the community, but there just aren't those people. In Weiser proper, only 14% of the population over the age of 25 has a college degree.
Wow.
Yeah, I
did not know that.
Yeah, it's pretty significant, and that says a lot about the demographics of our students as well. But one last issue about the difference between urban and rural would be the resources. You name the specialty areas: special ed, school psychologist, occupational therapist, speech pathologist, even a school counselor. It's very, very difficult to find people to fill those positions. And so, we're you resort to sharing resources with other school districts, or you contract for services, and you don't have people full time on site to help you with issues that are in your district every day, but you can't address them necessarily every day.
And I think from a personal perspective, when I was superintendent in Boise, it's a big enough town where I could go to the store and really nobody knew who I was. I don't think that's the situation in Weiser.
No, everybody knows your name.
Yeah, and probably address their issues with you in the market.
I got to tell you, I made it a conscious decision not to go to any of other people's favorite watering holes
I'll bet.
in the community. It wasn't a good, smart thing to do. Yeah. And so it was something over the 25 years I lived here. I made it a conscious point not to mingle in that regard.
Yeah, pretty smart. So it seems to me, though, you spent all those years in Weiser and then that year in Buhl. Similarities, differences. I know both communities fairly high poverty for introduced lunch, aren't they?
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons I was comfortable in the midst of the pandemic going to a district where they had a need, and I thought I had a skill set to help them. It's very similar. Weiser's a little bigger, has a little bit more student population, but not a huge difference. But these are very agricultural-based rural communities. School is the center of activity and interest, and with their sports and activities. And I thought it was a pretty good fit. And as it worked out, I was able to help them negotiate the school year last year in the midst of the pandemic, and then they have since hired a new full-time superintendent. I left that community with a lot of friends and a lot of fond memories, in spite of the difficulties that the pandemic created for students, teachers, parents, and administrators.
Yeah. I'm going to go off script here a little bit. We have some questions that are prepared, but I'm just wondering, there are those out there that would advocate that we just need to do away with public education, that it really doesn't play a valuable role. And something you just said really struck me, that in Weiser and in Buhl and in larger communities, but especially in relatively small communities, the school district is the heart of a lot of what goes on in that community. I mean, when I think about, going over when I was teaching in CUNA to play the Wolverines, that was a big deal. Snake River Valley Conference. And, it really is. It's a central part of the community.
It is absolutely that way in the rural communities that I'm familiar with, and not just the ones that I've worked in, but, we superintendents from all the other, the Payettes and the Fruitlands and the New Plymouths and the smaller districts. You are the kind of the heart and soul of the community. You provide enrichment activities for their kids, but you also provide entertainment for the community, whether it's sports or musical productions or those kinds of things. And, in Weiser, there is a sign as you enter the community, you drive by it, it says, "We love our kids, our community, and our country." And I think that says, how the community really is. The kids are the focus of the community.
Really speaks volumes. That just came to my mind because it's just hard to imagine. So how does that look? And I think one of the ways that's occurring now in Idaho is when you get, when I was in Boise, we had several charters that had come into the community, and we dealt with them to one degree or another. And now I know there's more charters going into smaller areas. I know there's one in Fruitland, for example, one outside of Middleton, if I'm not mistaken. And in Boise, if we lost 20 kids at a grade level or 50 kids at a grade level, we have 32 elementary schools. And so it was kind of spread, not saying that it didn't have an impact, because it did, but I would think that kind of an impact would be felt much more heavily in a rural community.
Yeah. There was a new charter school opened in 2019 in Fruitland, and they really marketed that they served the whole western end of the Treasure Valley. So they were recruiting students you know, um, from obviously Fruitland and Payette, which is only separated by a bridge, and New Plymouth. And they reached out to Weiser, and but they opened their doors with, boy, over, I think, about 220 to 250 kids. Now from Weiser, they drew, we believe, about 12 kids. And they run buses to get kids to and from the community, and it does have an impact. The thing about that, they can develop a school culture, but it isn't a community culture. And so, one of the things people enjoy about a neighborhood school is you're in your community, you're at home, you're attending your kids' activities. I don't know how they build that kind of a sense of community. I assume they're trying to. They're going to add a grade every school year until they're a full K through 12 program. So it hasn't had that much of an impact. I mean, 12 kids is not quite a classroom unit for us, and they're spread across grade levels. But sometimes those kids, I think one of the reasons they choose not to go to the charter would be because the proximity of your neighborhood school is near your home. And the other thing are the activity programs. So whether it's the fine arts or music or art or activities and sports, I think that tends to keep people at home a little bit.
Sure. And so a classroom unit, Will, that's how you get paid, right? I mean, a certain number of kids equals $100,000 or something like that.
Yeah, and it depends on the grade level. So there are bands of grade levels, and they because, for example, kindergarten is half time funded by the state. They say it takes 40 kids to constitute a unit, or a full unit, which would be about 20 kids in a classroom. And then primary grades, I think might be 20, and then grades 4 through 6, it's like 23. And we get to the high school, middle school, high school, it's like 16. So those classroom units are transformed or considered a unit for funding from the state. So in Weiser, we would run about 83 of those units. And so if you figure each one's about $100,000, that's where we got our about $8 million in funding.
There you go. So, but I mean, if you did lose 12 kids to a charter, well, that's half a unit in some cases, $50,000, somewhere around there. That's a significant amount of money.
Well, it's a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's basically a teacher. But if it's spread out over, 6 or 7 grade levels, you might not, you might miss the funding, but your class sizes aren't overly reduced, one kid, as opposed to having them all in one grade level. Now, so if you start getting 4 or 5 kids per grade level, now you're going to put a real stress on being able to retain teachers to work with those kids, and class sizes will naturally get bigger. That's a cause of concern.
Yeah, well, it makes it much more difficult to manage your finances too, I think, because it's so unpredictable. You just don't know.
You don't know. You're going to hire based on what you anticipate your enrollment is going to be, and then you hope that those kids show up in the fall.
Right. So in a small community, you could see, a substantial impact. My guess is Fruitland and Payette saw it a lot more than Weiser did, but boy, it can, and it is, I mean, you hear the argument, well, it's choice, and choice is always good. Well, choice is good sometimes, but it's what it does to the local communities that sometimes I wonder, how beneficial it's going to be.
I would agree with that sentiment, Don.
Okay, so there's a difference though between charter schools, which are public schools, no matter where they're located, started by, whomever, and then vouchers. Can you talk a little bit about, in your perception, the difference between a voucher and charter schools?
Well, just like you said, charter schools are public schools and they receive public funding. And the voucher, which we don't currently have, and we would hope that we don't adopt a voucher system, that would start extending the limited number of dollars that the legislature allocates to public schools across a broader range of private school students. And so it further diffuses the effectiveness of the dollar. And I taught in a private school, and I appreciate private schools. They have a different mission. They have a different, but that's a choice that I think parents choose and are willing to pay for their children, because they operate outside the scope of the rules and regulations that we do in public schools. So we have a really small private school in Weiser. It's like a handful of families that have, and I don't even know if they're registered. I don't think they're registered with the state. You have some parochial schools over across the river in Ontario, but they haven't really taken root here. What you're more likely to see in rural, out in Washington County, are homeschool students, and homeschool cooperatives where they get together and share curriculum, and but they're basically homeschool. We see some of those kids. We don't know how many there are because they don't have to register with the state. There's no regulations regarding them. But sometimes we'll see those kids because they want to enroll for just an advanced elective, or they want a course that they don't have access to a homeschool program for, or they want to be involved in our activity programs. So we occasionally see, and we've reached out to those families on occasion and said, we're here, we're a public school. If your child wants to enroll, we're happy to have them. But we sometimes see them at the secondary level because of the activity program or the advanced electives. We don't usually see them at the primary grade. So we don't usually see them until they want to enroll at the middle school or high school grade level.
I remember that creating kind of a sticky situation when a homeschooled kid would want to play basketball, and you got all your kids that are at the middle school already. Well, you got to give them the opportunity.
Yeah.
But it was, I remember it being a little bit contentious sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's also a little problematic when they want to enroll and graduate. And you don't have you don't know exactly what kind of coursework they completed and if it was from an accredited online institution or not. And sometimes, then you have to come up with a way to assess their grade level equivalency and determine whether or not to give credits that count towards graduation. Those are, those can be problematic, but those are issues you deal with.
Yeah, I know we struggled with that in Boise too. Well, one interesting piece of information, when we did the analysis last year in countering the legislation that was proposed, what we found was that you could look at 4 or 5 counties in the state of Idaho, and 75% of the kids, the private school kids, were in those counties. So, as it stood then, if you implemented a voucher program, it's probably going to redirect more money to Boise or to Twin Falls or to, Canyon County, and not really do anything except for, as you said before, diffuse the amount of money coming to a district like Weiser.
Yeah, it would be one thing, I think, if we weren't 50th in the nation in per pupil spending, and we were had enough funds that we were adequately providing for the kids in public schools that we currently have. Right. It's another thing if you're going to take this limited resource and and add several thousand more students to draw from the same pot of funds, and we're not able to provide all the quality of education we'd like to currently. So,
yeah. And it seems to me, Will, you're going to respond to this, that, I mean, in a program like that, it seems like all the accountability requirements should also be part of it if you were going to do something like that. I mean, you always hear this, the money should follow the kids, but it seems to me maybe the accountability should follow the kids too.
Yeah, I agree with that, Don, in terms of accounting for the use of those, the resources, to differentiate their use for education from whatever the mission of the operating body is, the religious tenets or the ideologies,
right,
and those kinds of things. But yeah, and all this reporting, and not only that, but if those ensuring that students of all abilities, all ethnic groups, all levels of demographics, poverty, students with disabilities are equally served in those institutions, which we open our doors, and whoever's here, we're going to serve to the best of our ability. And that's what public schools are about.
So, Will, one concern that I think we're seeing more of these days is educators getting frustrated and leaving the profession. I know salary challenges cause teachers to leave, but now it seems there are other issues causing them to leave as well. Is it a trust issue, or is it, what's going on there? Can you comment?
Well, I think teaching is a very difficult profession, and you got to be on every day. You got to know your stuff. You got to be prepared to deliver lessons in a variety of ways to meet different learning styles of kids. And kids know when you're faking it. And so they need and want your attention, and they need your support. We're seeing fewer and fewer people enter the profession. We track our graduates a little bit. We started tracking them in Weiser through the National Student Clearinghouse, and saw what majors they were enrolled in and what they were completing. Very, very few are enrolled in teacher education programs. We're just seeing that not so. It's a difficult profession, and then add to those pressures a pandemic, and what that did to teaching over the last couple of years in terms of public concerns about how to create a safe environment at school, the state policymakers' skepticism and criticism of public schools. It's no wonder that the environment's a lot more hostile and unwelcoming than I can remember it in 41 or 42 years. And I've always said, I said this on the scale of just dealing with a parent and a issue they might be having in school. I'd say, if you and that teacher and I can come to a resolution and work together, we can almost ensure a positive outcome for your kid, and we're all going to have to give and work together on that. And I think it's true on a larger scale too, that when administrators, teachers, students, parents work together with policy and with policymakers, and we trust each other to do the right things, we can almost assure a positive outcome for kids. But when there's a lack of trust, and there's skepticism and criticism, and there's attacks on boards for how they're handling mitigation strategies and all of that, it has become so hostile. It's not a surprise that it's not a real welcoming environment right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, in Boise, I remember watching the meeting where they decided to do a mask mandate, and there were thousands of people online But again, as a superintendent, and I had already retired, but I would go home and probably, could go to the store and everything else. But boy, if you're in a Weiser or a Buhl or a Fruitland, you don't have that luxury. I mean,
Yeah.
it's right there in the community, and it's very, very divisive, I would guess.
Yeah, currently, I've witnessed it. I'm not a practicing superintendent, but I'm still a resident of Weiser, and I'm very interested in the schools after having spent so many years. And it's a little disheartening to see, the hostility and the animosity, and that we haven't been able to find a way to kind of rally people together. And that's with the number of and the rate of disease transmission. And we've actually in Weiser suffered some deaths that were COVID related. And those in the past would be a rallying point for people to come together and go, well, we need to support each other and get through this. But I can't say that's been the case.
Yeah. So what gives you hope for public education going forward? I mean, there's got to be some light at the end of the tunnel, if you will.
Well, first of all, I don't think public schools are failing, despite what our critics say. And as I've heard you say, Don, on more than one occasion, more is asked of today's students than when you and I were back in school.
Oh, it's not even close.
It's the courses have more rigor. There's more opportunity. There's more demands made on students than ever before. And our kids rise to the challenge.
Yeah.
And they do. And what we'd like to do is celebrate that, I think we ought to take time. There's always a room for improvement, but I think we ought to celebrate the successes we've had. You and I have tried to do that a little bit with the working with superintendents. I know that back in 2019-20, when you and I would go around to the SIC schools and highlight successful programs that other people wouldn't even know about. There's so many great things going on. And so I don't know. I just think we need to be positive, look for silver linings, highlight them. We have to be open to criticism and try and address those and find a way to move forward. But public education can't and shouldn't go away. It is the essence of preparing students to move on into the adult life, be contributing community members to it enhances their quality of life and their earning potential. One of the things I used to do when I was high school principal is I'd take the Bureau of Labor Statistics, what their potential earnings would be based on their level of education. And of course, you got your, it starts by saying people who are 20, it's the statistics are based on adults 25 and over. And it says, what's the earning potential for somebody in that, that doesn't have a high school diploma? What is it with a high school diploma? What is it with some college? What is it with a 2-year associate's degree or technical certificate? What is it with a bachelor's degree or a professional degree? And it's pretty amazing. And
it is.
And so I always wanted to tell kids, you are making the most important investment in your life while you're here in school. And here's the other statistic I gave them. If you think about this, you're in school 7 hours a day. And that's not hardcore classroom 7, but you're in school from 8:30 to 3:30 or 4, whatever it is. You're not in school 17 hours.
Right.
You're in school for 170 days or 171 days. You're not in school for 190 days. So when you figure the math on that, kids are in school only about 14% of their life. But it's the most important 14% they spend.
Right.
And it translates into what their quality of life will be for the next 50 years.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good way to put it, Will. Thank you. But you know, I just laugh when I hear or I read on Facebook or I listen to people talk and they say, well, those good old days when we really did education back in the 70s. Well, you and I were in high school in the 70s. There were no advanced courses. There was no advanced placement. There was no dual credit courses. Everybody took the same courses. And we went through school, and I guess math, you know, you could get to calculus or not, whatever. And I mean, I know one thing, Bora High School, where I went, and Capital, where you went, have over 30 advanced placement courses now. So don't tell me that it's, you know, things were better academically then, because they weren't. And if you look at Weiser, it's the same thing. I know you did a ton of work with dual credit.
Yeah, we're really, that's one of the things that we're kind of proud of, is that we're trying to expand opportunities. We have chosen dual credit over advanced placement only because we can get our teachers certified and approved to teach those courses. And since most of our kids are going to stay, if they go to school, usually in state, those credits are applicable to all the in-state institutions. But we've also, besides those dual credit opportunities that are ever expanding, we also offer 5 career and technical programs, including construction trades, auto mechanics, health occupations, ag science, career exploration. And we're actually now looking at trying to expand into sort of the trades, because so few, you know, about 50% of our kids will go on to a post-secondary placement in either a 2-year or 4-year. Those other 50% of kids, we want to help prepare them to move on into some sort of trade or profession or gain full employment. A lot of them will take some time and just go to work. Some of them will go on missions for their church. Some join the military. But we want them to have as complete an experience in high school as we can. And so I'm kind of proud that we've been able to offer those enriched programs, because when only 14, a lot of the kids that we send to college, they're first generation college students.
Right.
Nobody else in the family's ever done that before. Like I said, we only have 14% of the adults over 25 in the community that have a college degree. So if we can get them out the door and get them to enroll in a post-secondary institution, we feel pretty good about that. It's even better if they can complete the program after 4 or 5 or 6 years.
Sure. I know one thing, when we added plumbing, HVAC, and electrical as programs that were offered at our technical school in Boise, I mean, the businesses in town went, thank goodness, because we can't find them.
Yeah,
you know, they're all their plumbers at A1 Plumbing, for example, they had to get them out of state.
Yeah,
it's a way it is the way to grow your own, as you say, especially in the trades.
And they can get up to the 2 years of their 4-year apprenticeship done while they're in high school.
Yeah,
and so we'd like to see that expand, because quite honestly, there's a shortage of the trades in Weiser. So you kind of have to get people to come from outside of Weiser to come service your plumbing or electrical needs, or your HVAC. Now, that's not, I mean, there are those businesses in town, and we're trying to reach out and get them to help us initiate the student to registered apprenticeship program. And because it's a federally approved program, those kids who are 16 and older can work in, you know, those situations that they ordinarily wouldn't be able to work in until they're 18.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I know the state has been really trying to help school districts get more involved in that. So that's a really, really good example of how that can work. So let's see here. We've got just a few minutes left. So we hear the term local control bandied about a lot these days. What does that mean to you as a former superintendent who worked in urban and rural districts?
Well, I think school boards represent democratic government at its most fundamental level. And so they are elected, or if it's an open seat, they can be appointed. But we got to trust those people to know their community, to know what the needs are, and to know their schools. And then, right. And so the role of a state policy maker is to set some guidelines, work with the state board on developing policies, have the State Department provide those additional resources that are needed to ensure that every kid, regardless where they live in Idaho, has access to sort of an equal opportunity, provide the funding, and then get out of the way and let the boards do their job. And if there's something that goes amiss, they're equipped to handle it. There's all kinds of policies for people to, if somebody goes rogue or somebody does something wrong, there's plenty of sideboards and opportunities for to take corrective action, but that really ought to be done at the local level.
Agreed. And it's such a tough job right now. I mean, they're not getting paid a lot, zero. So it's just it's so challenging, and I just admire those folks who are willing to take that responsibility on. So final question. What advice would you give to a young person considering education as a career? Would you tell them to bag it and not do it, or would you encourage them? Or
No. Working with children and adolescents, it can be challenging, and without a lot of immediate gratification, every now and again I can't tell you the number of times I run into a kid who's now, they're not a kid anymore,
right?
And they'll go, "Oh, you must hate me because I was a knucklehead in high school when I was principal or assistant principal." And I go, "You know what? I hope you haven't been carrying that baggage for all these years, because I don't remember that." And I go, I remember you, and I remember maybe we had to have a discussion about an issue, but you got to have a short memory as an educator. You got to be forgiving, and you got to know that kids are going to change over time and they're going to make mistakes. I certainly wouldn't want anybody to have predicted my potential as a career educator based on what I was like as a 17-year-old kid. Yeah. And so I think it's a really rewarding career, and it's a calling. And if you approach it that way, because when you see the light bulb go on, or you help a kid master a skill or a concept and they get it, you gotta celebrate that. So rule number one is you gotta relish the success that you have, but you gotta block out all the noise as a young educator. You and I don't know if your experience was like mine. It took me about 4 or 5 years before I settled into feeling comfortable in the classroom, that I was competent in my content, and I had developed some tools in my toolbox that helped me, learn how to teach different concepts or skills, or approach kids because they had a different learning style. It takes time, and you've got to block all the other noise out and work on mastering your profession and your skills. And we know that the life expectancy of a young teacher is, it takes more than a couple of years, and sometimes they go, "That's not for me," which is why it bothers me that there's so much emphasis placed on the number of, when we fill out the reports annually and say to the State Department how many of our teachers are, quote, proficient. Well, they're proficient because they've learned if they weren't proficient, they probably left the profession or were counseled out of the profession.
Right. That's exactly in the first 3 years.
In the first 3 years.
Yep.
And but it takes some time. And I would just say, keep your nose to the grindstone, try and block out the noise, celebrate your successes, and don't take things so personally when kids lash out at you. They're lashing out at your position, but not you necessarily. Get to know your kids, be patient, listen, they're going to tell you. And so I suppose that's the coach in me, that you try and say, hey, look, my classroom is my team. We're all in this together. Here's our learning objective. Let's see how many of us we can get across the finish line. And let's be and try and be positive. And I can tell you, I wasn't always that way as a coach. Sometimes I could be a little hard-nosed, a little unforgiving, a little direct. And I look back now and I go, oh, I probably could have handled that a little with a little more more compassion.
Yeah, a little bit better maybe. Well, Wil, my friend, it's been a pleasure having a chance to visit with you. I learned a few new things that I didn't know about you, and I really do appreciate your philosophy and your approach to all this, to what's going on and sticking with it and working hard. And it's great to find out a little more about your background and talk to you.
Well, Don, just a final comment. You and I, like was said in the intro, we competed against each other in high school. We went off and got to know that you were not really the enemy. We just shared an interest and a camaraderie with our own teammates and competed against each other. I have the utmost respect for you, what you stand for, and what you've accomplished over your career.
Thank you.
And I consider it a real pleasure and a privilege to continue to have conversations with you about the value of public education in Idaho.
It's been a pleasure. Feelings mutual, my friend. Take care.
Okay. Thanks.